Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
This episode features the band Horrendous, and when I say the band, I don't just mean the vocalist, as is usually the case on this podcast. Instead, we have all four members of Horrendous, that is Jamie, Matt, Damian, and Alex. Guys, welcome to you all.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
So obviously this is going to be a very different format for us. So I'll just ask this question to all of you, and whoever wants to jump in may do so. So starting off, how would you describe Horrendous's music? What genre of metal would you say you fall into?
Oh, the question none of us want to answer. I think for us, quite obviously, like we're coming from kind of a death metal lineage. I would say at this point in our career, I think we don't feel like that term really kind of encapsulates what we're doing. I certainly think that the tools that we're using to make our music are kind of death metal tools, I guess, and like death metal sounds, and of course like many other varieties of metal throughout metal history. But I think at this point in our career, we're really trying to step outside of the limits of what death metal kind of like prescribes. But that would be my answer. If anyone else wants to add to that, very slinky, not giving you a tag.
That's good. I think that keeps things open. It's tough when you're a band that I think is like trying to pull like some core elements of certain styles of metal that we all really love, and it's also like not really making music on a like using a criteria sheet either. And so a lot of different things come into the fold. So I don't know. I think we've all been in the conversation of like, what should we call, like if we could come up with our own sort of tag to use as our own, what would we use? And we haven't settled on anything, but I think that, the world vaguely recognizes us as like, as a death metal band with leanings in like more experimental or wider ranging, like musical decorations.
Did you all come together based on like a shared interest in death metal, like initially, regardless of kind of how you moved since then? Was death metal the sort of genre that got you all into extreme metal?
I guess that's probably how the band got started in a way, in the sense that, Matt and I are brothers. We've always played in bands together. Been interested in a lot of different types of, metal and other heavier music. But I think when we met Damian, he was a very big death metal guy, basically, and we had some interest in death metal. And I think when we started playing together, that's just what felt the best to play together, because we both had a somewhat of a vocabulary in it, and kind of were able to feed off of each other as we were just starting to play together and figuring out what we're even doing. What is this band going to be?
Yeah, I feel like I honestly didn't even hear that much death metal other than like the absolute classics, like Death and Morbid Angel stuff before meeting Damian. He was kind of like the decrepit gatekeeper, I guess, of all the death metal secrets that we started with. And I think for whatever reason, just like when we started jamming together, like with Damian, that just seemed to make the most sense, I guess, for all of us to play together. And it just went from there.
Probably my lack of ability to play anything else. That was the true catalyst.
I also wasn't there at the formation of the band. You guys met in college, right?
Yeah.
At Columbia?
Yep.
South Carolina?
Yeah. It was like 2019, I guess. I mean, Jamie and
2000. 2009.
2009.
2009,
Oh,
yeah.
What the hell am I saying? 2009.
Been almost 15 years, but I've only been with them for like 7 years ish, 6 or 7. And I did not. I mean, I listened to all kinds of metal growing up, but death metal definitely wasn't my like core upbringing. It was probably like actually fairly low on my list of like metals that I was listening to a lot. There was definitely, again, like classics for sure, but I was like a thrash metal kid and like super nerdy metal, like power metal and folk metal and stuff. Like I listened to a lot of that stuff when I was really young. So like, I don't know, I feel like when I met these guys, they were sort of like listening to a pretty large variety. So definitely not like death metal rooted as like a focus, but it was there.
Your phrase list of metals.
So what was it that drew all of you to that style of music then? Like, I mean, particularly if you're saying that like many of you didn't listen to it first, like what kind of like beyond, I suppose, Damian's influence, is there anything in particular about the death metal sound that, you know, appealed to you?
In a weird way, I think part of it too is just like thinking of vocals. Like I love traditional metal, and like the earlier thrash band that kind of have like, I don't know, more clean singer, high pitched, like really operatic, athletic vocalists. And I also think part of it is just like, nobody's going to sing like this anyway. So like, what's something that we can actually do? And I think it very much did kind of grow out of the possibility and the tools that we had at the time. And that's something that we could all do and make it sound convincing, I think, that like wasn't outside of our range at the time, for like a better term.
So before you all started, playing together, and before you all started writing lyrics, did you care much about lyrics in metal? Did you pay any attention to kind of what was going on? Like we've talked to people that used to, buy the CD and rip out the lyrics and look at them and pour through them. And we've talked to people that just had no interest whatsoever. Where do you all kind of fall on that spectrum?
Well, I haven't spoken much yet, so I guess I'll start with this one. I mean, I personally never cared about lyrics, and I never like knew what the bands were saying, but I cared a lot about like album titles and song titles, and which is a little strange, I guess, but yeah, I don't know. I love to just like see album titles and song titles and sort of let my imagination run wild about like what they could be talking about, but not actually care enough to look it up. So that's my strange little answer there.
Okay.
I think that's more I think that's an experience. I don't know if people talk about it all that often. We don't get a chance to like think about like how we interacted with these things first, but I felt that's weird. In the metal world, I feel like I have this distinct memory. This is like very embarrassing, but it was a distinct memory before discovering metal of like having Green Day CDs as in like elementary school and carrying the lyric books around with me and like trying to like trace the fonts like on pieces of paper and like copying the lyrics on down to other pieces. And that was at a time where I like paid attention to lyrics more, I feel like, when I was really young. But when I got into metal, like it was also like I've always been an instrumentalist. I've been playing since I was a kid. And like that really was the focus for me too. I was always like enamored with the lyrics because I felt like the linguistic content was unlike everything else I was running into. So I definitely looked through the booklets and was like sort of like enchanted by what was in there. But I didn't, unless it was sort of like the anthemic sort of like memorable choruses and things like that. I wasn't like super glued on it, but I did have a drawl to it. Like it felt like some kind of like incantatory thing that like I wanted to interact with, but I didn't really know how to until I got older and started being like a little bit more curious about like semantic content and wanting to be like, like I guess people are putting a lot of effort into these lyrics, even if I can't always tell what's going on. And then also started listening to a lot more music with like singing, like a lot more metal with like traditional styles of singing, which like I started paying attention a little bit more. I also identify with Damian a little bit in terms of this, of being like, the lyrics weren't really the focus for sure. I was like, I really loved rhythms and riffs and stuff. But there was definitely something was haunting me about it for a long time.
Well, especially in the context of death metal, like the vocals, like, yes, there are lyrics, but a lot of the time they aren't the focus. And it really is like about the vocals creating sort of an atmosphere or something. And I guess that's part of what I was getting at with like being very intrigued by song titles and album titles is more just like the vibe or something that an album could give, just by like reading those words, even if you totally ignored the actual lyrics.
Are there like unintriguing album titles or song titles? Like, do you remember buying a death metal album and like looking at the song titles and be like, oh, this sucks?
That's a good question. Maybe one of those like Dimmu Borgir albums that's just like 3 random words that conjures with nothing.
All about the conjuring in the end.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Definitely now. I feel like I'm like, now after, we were just talking about this a little bit earlier, like after consuming so much of the music and like just kind of being like playing around in atmospheric tropes or like linguistic tropes for a really long time, just being like certain. Now sometimes I look at song album titles or song lyrics, I'm just like, just like, can we not do this again? Like, can we not have like the same, like it almost to the point where like the specific words of what they might mean like gloss over my brain, because I'm just like, you said something gross, you said something esoteric, you said something like super cheesy, you know, and guilty also personally in terms of like what I would name a thing. Like, I'm not saying I'm any different, but it's like you get to a certain point in which you start being like, oh God, like, you know, there is like, there are tropes and you run into them a lot. And sometimes that means that you're like kind of judgmental, or you don't really know, you're not really like interfacing with the content.
So do you think that those tropes are kind of essential to like the like identification of metal lyrics? Like, could you identify metal lyrics without those tropes as like, you know, being metal lyrics and not lyrics from some other genre, for instance?
I don't know. I actually think, I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of our lyrics, actually. Where I do think there's a form of language that is used and a style of language that is used that it doesn't even necessarily have to relate to the content or like what the message is. And I think personally, I guess, as our band has grown and like explored different musical styles, I think as someone who writes lyrics for the band, like, it's obvious we moved away from kind of like gore, monsters, whatever, scary things after pretty much the first record. And yet, to your point, if you were to open the lyrics and look at them, it's like divorced from any music, you know it's a metal record. And I think there's something to be said about like, you're playing into the language and the types of language that are used, much as like, I don't know, if you're playing a metal guitar riff or something, like you're very often playing similar intervals that are in other metal music, right? But I don't think, and I guess this is where our lyrics come in, I don't think that like the content has to be tied to the presentation and like the forms and the very particular like surface of the language. And in writing the lyrics, like I definitely use what I would say is like metal language, but often the message beneath, or like what's actually being said using kind of those coded terms, is like much different than most of what I'm seeing today, at least. But stuff that I would be writing, I think, and like a lot of us in general, kind of as we're approaching lyrics like this, but certainly more in the lineage of like Latter-day Death or something, and like not in the same style, but using metal sounding language, for lack of a better term, to communicate ideas that aren't horror or death or monsters or whatever.
Kind of like philosophical, right?
Yeah, it's like finding a way to delve into philosophical thinking while still using the same type of language. And like, you're not crossing into philosophical language. I mean, we're guilty of that, of course, on like the new record, shit like that. But finding ways to have philosophical thinking, discussion, reflection, while maintaining like the aesthetic, I think. I guess that's what I've been getting at this whole time. Is like the aesthetic is still heavy metal, but the content isn't necessarily. Mm. And I guess that does kind of prove your point that, like, yes, I think there is a language that is very particularly metal, and that you can tell without hearing like a single note of music. If you just look at it, you know that it is. And even like stranger than that, like I think there's a lot, since metal has kind of come to like a crazy prominence again. I think a lot of artists that aren't necessarily metal are also kind of dipping into this language and this aesthetic. And you can see, even if it's a pop artist doing it, it's like, this is metal. but they're bringing it into the pop world, right? So I do think there's an independent existence of like metal terms. I don't know, metal terminology, the metal lexicon.
Do you have an example of that of a pop artist doing that off the top of your head?
I guess I'm thinking more like logo in my mind right now, like all the shirts for like, I don't know if it was like Miley Cyrus or something that looks like the Metallica logo or something.
Oh, okay.
Which I guess is more like presentation of language. I would have to think a little bit deeper in my mind to come up with like lyrics that were used, but
like the borrowing of the aesthetics.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't think of any good examples in terms of lyrics, but I'm like nearly certain I've seen it happening. And maybe I'm just like making a blanket statement because I'm seeing kind of like the visual aesthetic being borrowed. But I think, I don't know, I guess the very fact that it is being borrowed to me just speaks to the fact that there is something there. There is something that is uniquely this.
Okay. I mean, this might be a difficult question to answer, but can you think of any kind of hallmarks of metal language that like you think are, I don't know, present in a lot of the like lyrics that either you yourselves write or that you've seen like, you know, elsewhere that exist independent of like, you know, the stereotypical themes of metal that we've talked about?
So like you're saying, wait, so you're wondering if there are things that are like patently metal language that are not archetypical, that are outside of like the tropes?
Well, they can still be archetypal, but like but I'm talking about like actual like linguistic practices that aren't necessarily like connected to like themes, like, you know, Satanism, let's say, right? That would be like more of like a theme, that'd be content. But like, you know, in terms of like actual just like language style, like what kind of like strikes you as being like typical metal language, not necessarily typical metal theme.
This is the only thing, and I can get this out of my brain because this is like one of the only like, I would say like hard examples that crossed my mind in terms of thinking about this interview, which is I was thinking about some of the records that precede my joining the band and some of the lyrics on Areta, and thinking about how like, I think something that happens a lot in metal that is not necessarily like a specific theme, it's almost like a reaching towards or like a hearkening to a kind of like linguistic world that is like, the only way I can describe it is like a 19th century like historical poem. Like there's a lot of like, I'm thinking of like Coleridge or something where there's like an epic poem that is like reaching back into ancient history and is like bringing a lot of mythological figures up and then like spinning, like using the core of the mythological tales as like a way to create new, you know, like a new linguistic versions of those. Like I'm thinking of Ozymandias, I'm thinking for like even like Obelisk, like certain songs where like for us, but also lots of, you see this in metal a lot where like lyrics are hearkening back to some kind of piece of history or a character from history, mythology, and sort of like using it in this kind of like the language is very theatrical. It's very much in, I would say, in the lineage of epic poetry, like 100%. Like a lot of, I think that if you open I could think of a number of bands where if you open their lyric booklets, like this could have existed in like a classical text that you would learn in like in English coursework in university or something like that. And that has like, you know, like has a certain kind of like lilt to it. Like even if it's not in a particular, even if it's free verse and it's like not in a particular rhyme scheme or something, like it has kind of like a, you know, like a kind of flow to it that is very much kind of like older styles of oral poetry.
Yeah. That makes me think, I mean, I think the obvious like reach here too is kind of the classic horror writers in the English language anyway. So I mean, like obviously a lot of like Edgar Allan Poe worship, like H.P. Lovecraft, and I think in their descriptions as well, like kind of how descriptive and like floral their writing is, and decorative, I guess. I think that comes to my mind when I'm thinking of metal lyrics too, and it's like divorced even from like their horror content, like their use, how many adjectives are on a page to like describe one thing, you know? And I think when it comes to metal lyrics, like so much is in the description of a thing rather than like the noun itself. I almost feel like the noun takes a huge backseat to how it is being described. And there's like so many. This is funny because I happened to buy Leprosy the other day, of like the record. Of course, I've heard it hundreds of times, but reading the lyrics, it's like half the songs are just, each stanza is kind of saying the same thing, but just finding like new disgusting ways of saying it. So it's like, all right, someone's skin is falling off, but here's 5 different ways of talking about how the skin is falling off. And I think that to me rings very true of like, again, like H.P. Lovecraft, a whole fucking like page is spent explaining one thing or one person or one place. And I think to me, a lot of metal lyrics are that. It's like getting as descriptive and nitty gritty as you can with whatever the topic is and whatever the horror is, I guess, to make you squirm, to make you sit inside of the story that's being told.
I think something else, like going beyond the imagery, something that we do in our lyrics is we care about how the words actually sound. Like I think that we use a lot of like alliteration and consonants, and even like I don't know, I kind of like the sound of like inter sentence rhyming, and I think that's something that is sort of unique about our vocals and how we structure the lyrics, because it's not just about the story that they're telling or the message, but also the way we describe the thing or the way we tell it.
So kind of building off this question of the way your band does lyrics, could you just broadly describe how it works with all of you being involved in the lyric process? Like, is it, this is my song, I write all the lyrics, or like, do you come together? Are there disagreements where someone's like, I don't like that line, I do like this line, and there's clashes? How do you resolve that? What is the process for lyrics, given that so many people are involved?
It's usually pretty much like people assigned to song, and it happens almost more in terms of like who feels the inspiration. It's like you wrap up, and lyrics are always last for us, always, and that's even after oftentimes like figuring out vocal patterns first. Sometimes it's like, this is how I'm going to sing it, and then the words sometimes come after that. But I think a lot of it is someone is excited by a song, there's an idea that the song speaks to that person, and they write it, and that's kind of how it happens. And it's usually pretty hands off. I feel like the changing of lines and things like that usually happens more in the studio, where it's like people are actually trying to record, we're trying to record vocals of the lyrics, and it's like, oh shit, this line doesn't fucking fit. What am I going to do? Or like, there's all this empty space here that I probably should have put words in. And then we all kind of like scheme of what to put there. So there's definitely a collaborative part that I think happens, especially in that like real time moment. But other than that, it's pretty hands off, I'd say. And we kind of, I think we like giving each other that space to explore that and not really feeling the need to critique it much.
If you were to kind of like go back and think about yourselves in 2009 when you released your first EP, or even 2012 when you released your first album, what do you think is the biggest difference in how you all approach writing together? Or is everything kind of the same from that starting point?
In a way, I mean, I think process is still pretty similar in terms of like, even back then it was still like, all right, Jamie gets these songs, like Damian will do these songs, I think the biggest change has been in like what it is that we're trying to say. And that is like wildly different now. Like the first record and the first EP was very much just kind of a worship or like nostalgic kind of monument of sorts to what is and what we were listening to at the time. And like they're scary, they're fun, they're gory, they're very typical of what you would find in the genre, I think. And
very horror movie influenced.
Yeah, certainly like horror movie influenced, like space, the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think as the music expanded in terms of sounds, in terms of experimentation, I think we just didn't feel like that really cut it anymore. It just didn't make sense. And that's really what, in my opinion anyway, that's really what like drove us to start exploring some other themes and other ways of writing lyrics and other things to think about, really. Like what is our music saying? It's certainly saying more than just this. It's not just about like getting eaten by a zombie or something, you know, like the music just felt much more sophisticated than that. And I think the lyrics kind of had to follow suit.
Are these discussions that you've actually had on like the metal level? Like, or because if you're all writing kind of in like, this is my song, this is your song kind of thing, it seems like that could create a situation where the songs in the album don't have any clear links. Like, is there a broader discussion where you sit down and say, okay, everyone has their songs, but the album itself has this kind of broader theme? Or do you just kind of let the songs be independent?
I don't remember any discussions like that ever that we've had. I think we still kind of do the independent thing, and I don't know, maybe there's like indirect pressure on each other of like, oh crap, Matt's are really good. I gotta like, you know, turn it up a little bit here. But we've never had any discussions about we need to work harder on this, or we should focus on these themes, or
we don't coordinate at all.
Yeah, I think
thematically.
Maybe we just have similar life experiences at the times when we're like writing these lyrics, and that because of that there end up being these common threads. I mean, that's my guess, I would say at this point. Whereas like, again, like our demo was, we just recorded these like 5 instrumental songs. We need to like write lyrics in a day. So we just like did it, you know, like it's not like that anymore.
Yeah. Strangely enough though, I do think there is a lot of influence in terms of like who finishes things first too. So it's like, all right, the first song came back that someone finished. And I do think that there's maybe an indirect element of influence there too, where as Jamie was saying, like it's not just that you see someone's work and you think it's great, but also like, I wonder if that sometimes spins the wheels a little bit. But we've also been experiencing the past couple records that there seems to be some force that is like unifying all of this. And again, whether it's our experiences, whether it's the fact that we're just working together all the time. But there seems to be this current that is binding things together for us. And this is crossing into some type of like, I don't know, mystic, like shared consciousness or something, I don't know, between us. But I have felt that regardless of any intention to do so, that the last couple of records we've done like really are pretty thematically coherent. And it's often a surprise to us, like the record kind of is over and we're looking back. And part of why we love doing interviews like this is it gives us a chance, I think, to really take stock of everything that's there, and stories and narratives and perspectives kind of start falling into place almost like after the fact, in ways that I almost think if we sat down and we're like, we're going to write the record about this, like that would probably end up being a shitty record by us. I think there's this element of like spontaneity and this element of trusting the muse, I guess, and then looking back afterwards, like once we're done, the absolute like fever pitch hysteria of like making the album and stepping back and breathing. Oh my God, look at this thing. And there's always something there, which is cool.
Right. I mean, you kind of talked about like, you know, writing the songs independently and stuff, and then ending up with like something that is thematically coherent. I wondered, like, I mean, do each of you kind of have like your own kind of unique writing styles, or do you, because I mean, when we were reading the lyrics, I mean, I don't know, Wes, you can disagree with me here, but like, I don't think the lyrics kind of read like they were obviously written like by different people.
No,
they had like a consistent like linguistic kind of style, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't like be able to confidently divide them into categories. No.
Yeah. So like, I mean, did you guys ever talk about like using a consistent style? Like, okay, this is going to be like the horrendous like lyric writing style, and everyone has to kind of cohere with that? Or have you just kind of ended up, you know, again by chance, like writing in a very similar style?
Yeah, I probably think that is just like our experience of working together for so long, probably. I'm sure we've influenced one another, and just, reading each other's work and inspiring each other. But yeah, we never like set out the Horrendous lexicon or anything. But maybe we should.
The Horrendous style guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The font book is like gonna come out.
Some sort of tome that comes with the album.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is just a guess. I mean, it's very fun to speculate about these things.
Sure.
I don't participate in a lyrical production, so this maybe helps. There's one less person to sort of like potentially muddy the linguistic unification. But I do think we share in common. Like if I read a set of lyrics and I was like, this really doesn't feel like, I feel like I'm tuned into the kind of content, the kind of like atmosphere or aesthetic that the band like generally reaches for, and I like that place that the band reaches for. I think we all have this in common, that like most of us like metal with like more, I don't want to say serious, but like sort of like with a lyrical depth to it. Like no one out of the four of us, I think, like prefers to listen to like, metal bands that are about like pizza and zombies, and like slamming beers. Like there's maybe like we all have parts, like they're all, small corners of our loves of metal that have some of that like more silly thing going on. But I think all of us generally, like when I think about like all of the musics that we like the most from the metal world, like they're all like usually fairly philosophical, very serious, or like dark or what or something, like it differs. I don't want to say that it's all the same, but just so I wonder if that affinity across the four of us like contributes to at least there being like a little bit of a stylistic focus that tricks a reader into not being able to differentiate between writers.
Yeah. I mean, and this actually like relates nicely to the next question that I wanted to ask. So there's been this kind of ongoing debate on the podcast as to whether or not extreme metal should be viewed as kind of escapist fantasy and entertainment, or like a genuine reflection of the artist's own like views, politics, and identities. So we wondered what your position is on this, because like a lot of your lyrics, for instance, do regularly deal with themes of like satanic pacts, grisly rituals, and people disavowing gods. So is this, all just in the aim of the, shall we say, like horrendous, or broadly speaking, are these themes and stories meant to connect with like, your personal like identities, opinions, real issues in the real world?
I think for us personally, we definitely want it to connect more, and not just, I think when I'm sitting down to write lyrics anyway, I don't just want it to like express me or express what I think. I think I want the audience to think as well. And I don't even necessarily want to give them something to agree with necessarily, but I think there's something to feel. And I want them to me, our music is so emotive and so evocative. And I want there to be ideas that are equally as stimulating there. And metal as a whole, should it be escapist or not? That's hard to say. A lot of my favorite bands, I would say, have more like escapist lyrics. Like at the end of the day, my favorite bands are still like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and all them. And those things do comfort me. Those things make me feel good. So I think there's room for both. And I think both are important. And I think in some ways they balance one another. And I do think, especially on our newest record, I think we kind of do have a balance of that as well. Like there are songs that are a bit more like meant to make one feel good, and then there's songs that are there to make you think. And in a way, I think maybe that's the secret of why some of metal's power is that it can be equally mindless and yet also really hefty. And because of the heftiness of the music, like that is why if we want to thinking of lyrics in general across metal, Alex is mentioning like, I don't know, epic poetry, like, and these more complicated linguistic forms, I do think because of the nature of the music, it's like natural to also slide in like difficult words and difficult ideas that don't necessarily always have a home in other places because it just doesn't seem right. So I guess my answer would be I think there's room for both, and it's absolutely necessary that both are there. And I think everybody who loves metal like loves bands that are more just for an escape, and then equally loves bands that aren't, that are like, you're really trying to make me content with something, whether it's self or world or whatever.
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that and say, I don't know if this will make sense, but I feel like in our lyrics, a lot of the imagery we use is essentially escapist and like, painting a picture of like whatever, something fantasy or something like satanic, but the message behind it often is some sort of philosophical battle or something that we've, had in our own personal lives. So it kind of is both at the same time, but through these different elements.
Well, that actually links
Assume both of them
all really well to our first question about like your specific lyrical choices, because you mentioned kind of the big words and the epic poems and things like that. And we noticed that throughout all your albums so far, there's a definite trend for the inclusion of like multisyllabic words, which maybe the average person wouldn't be familiar with. Examples include dendrites, purloined, sanguinary, aeons ensconced in Cimmerian shade, neped, sidriel, Suzerain, Anidonia, and on the new album we have Chrysopoeia, Preterition, Exogenesis, and Ontological. What is the goal or aim in using these kind of words that many people might not know? Like, what impact would it have on your ultimate artistic statement if, for instance, the song Chrysopoeia was just the alchemic production of gold, or a line like narcotic hush to calm your trepidations was drugged hush to calm your worries?
I'm sure we all probably have different thoughts on that.
Yeah. I have so many.
I'm going to speak very quickly so others can give it. I think for me, part of it is just the mystery too. It's like I have some of those words I didn't know either, and I was kind of searching for like a way. I think it's double-edged. It's like in one way I want it to sound, I want it to flow more. I want it to sound a little more, that's where I'm looking, pretty, I guess, at the end of the day. And I want it to sound something that I don't hear all the time. And I want it to stop me in my tracks. And at the same time, I do also like a bit of mystery in there. That kind of, I just feel like that all adds to the atmosphere of the song for me anyway. But we can just go down the line here.
Yeah. I think this relates heavily back to your last question, actually, to some degree, which like I do think it's a little bit of a false debate because like lots of different people take different approaches in terms of like whether something is a political representation, like whether like, someone who's writing esoteric, lyrics about demons and old seals and magical texts, like whether that's something that somebody actually wants you to study or whether they think it's like a fun aesthetic world to escape into for a moment. And I think this goes the same in terms of like, this reminds me of something that Matt told me many years ago. And even though I understand that it is very reductive and maybe even somewhat cheesy, like Matt once told me in a private conversation, we're talking about like metal music and why we're still have this connection to it at this point in our lives after so long, is that like metal is about being like larger than life, right? Like and I think that holds true literally regardless of what genre you go to. Even if you listen to like some super depressive black metal that's about like literally like contemplating like not being alive anymore, like there's something about like turning up the volume on a particular feeling so that it is like almost larger or like like then sort of like the dry description of the event of like depression or something like that, right? And I think like in terms of the word choice, right, like if you were, I'm thinking of Wes, like this example you used about like the drug like drugs to calm your worries. It's like, well, we say that. We have that language already. We're having that conversation all the time. And like metal's not here for that. Like metal is trying to go like to bring you to a state that is like beyond like the quotidian. And so like the use of these words, like I feel like almost as a kind of like magical tongue, like puts you in that state of mind. Like it makes you wonder, for one, right? Like it makes you like search for things. Then I think poetry does this too, right? It's like poetry exists because like everyday language is not providing something. There's a lack, or there's some place that everyday language is not bringing us. So like if metal's about being larger than life, it's like, well, then the words have to be larger than life too. The words have to be larger than like the linguistic space of our everyday experience. And it also goes back to Damian's point about sort of like not just the sort of like the type of word, but also like when you say something like ensconced or something, like there's like a serpentine quality to it, like there's many different ways other words you could use. But when Damian or Matt is like singing that word on top of the word just being kind of weird and then you add like the vocal style and the delivery of the word, like this is all part of a kind of like magic formula of the music. And I think that like we have no choice. Like these words show up because of like they feel like directly equipped to achieve the purpose.
I love that you said that, like praising this answer. I think the other thing I like about it too is that it's not just making experience and kind of bringing it to this level of being larger than life, but I also think it works backwards. Of like, I was thinking about this a lot in making the new record, of like backwards reverse engineering the mind to also like start to think of everyday life as the larger than life event, because it is. Like, even though if you were the only human being on the planet, like your experience would be monumental. It's just that everybody is having an experience. There's billions of us, and so everything seems like it is ordinary and everyday. And I think the language also kind of works in that other direction, where I'm hoping anyway to like see heroic moments in the things that we're all just doing all the time, and in the thoughts that everyone is having all the time that they don't get to express maybe, or that they aren't even aware they're thinking, but they are. And I think that's a part of the package that you were kind of talking about too.
Yeah.
You mentioned briefly a desire for the language to be a bit pretty. Is that like at odds at all with death metal? Is it? I mean, your band's name is Horrendous, right? Like, is the aim for pretty language something that matches the grind and the the darkness that kind of often is associated with this genre?
I think in a way, for me, to me, the hallmark of the band, and I think what it ultimately separates us from a lot of other people, is how we particularly use melody. And there are a lot of melodic death metal bands, but I don't think that the way that we use melody is similar to how they're using it. And I do think that those two often match up. So it is, yes, I think that the language and the prettiness of the language to me does actually match like these moments of transcendent experience, I guess, that we're trying to get from the melody. And ultimately all the darkness of the record, I think, only highlights even more like those explosive moments of melody. And we don't use them a lot, but that's kind of the point. It's like you have to have this contrast, you have to have this like force that's working against, and that just, when that moment is revealed, when that beautiful moment is revealed, I think it's all the more powerful. So to me, having the language kind of mirroring that as well, we're like, yes, the language is like in content dark, but in terms of how it sounds, going back to like the physical act of speaking, like how does the tongue move? How does your mouth feel when you say it? Like, does it seem more decorative than other language? And I think there's that element kind of ties into the music for me.
So in order to produce this kind of language, do you all use like a thesaurus? Because we've had debates on this podcast of some people that are very pro thesaurus and some people who think like you should never look up a word. Do you actively, like when you're writing, use these sources to find new vocabulary?
And is it the same for all of you, or
Yeah.
do you, yeah, or are some of you pro thesaurus, some of you anti?
Yeah, we're gonna have a live debate right now.
Yeah.
That's sort of, yeah.
I'm excited. I also feel like a lot of the phrases that you brought up earlier that you're kind of pulling from the songs, Jamie wrote. So I'm curious to see what he said.
Is that true? I don't know if that's
Yeah, there's like multiple. I would say like 60% of the phrases brought up are stuff that you have written. So
Yeah.
Well, for Puya, I'm not even sure how to fully say it, but I feel like I came across that word around the time when we were writing these lyrics, and I probably had to look it up and was like, oh damn, this is like kind of like the exact meaning I want this song to convey. And it just kind of worked. Like it was just a timing thing where I came across it. Whether I use a thesaurus ever, I mean, occasionally, I guess. I don't usually set out to like, I got to find a crazy word for this song in that sense. I would say I dabble in it like when I feel like it's necessary, when I like literally cannot think of a word. But I wouldn't say I try to find large multi-syllable words necessarily to like, just throw people off or anything like that. So yeah, I feel like a lot of it's just luck, like coming across ideas, and like when I go to write a song, I might still have, remember those ideas from the past.
what do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, a thesaurus is just a tool, and like we're making art.
Here it is.
I mean, well, I don't. Are you implying that my answer is that I just read the thesaurus?
No.
Okay.
I was just excited about like the sort of like the bluntness of that, and being like, yeah, it's true. It exists for a reason.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I personally, I think setting a rule that you shouldn't use a thesaurus doesn't really make sense. But so yeah, I've definitely used one before. But like Jamie said, a lot of it is sort of like happenstance timing of like you'll read something cool and come across like a really neat word, and then it just enters your mental lexicon, and you end up using it when you're crafting these lyrics. And I mean, even, and then going back to the thesaurus point, I mean, you like, at least when I use a thesaurus, I mean, you're still crafting a stanza or a line, like
You're chasing something.
Right. Like you don't just look in the thesaurus and say, oh yeah, that's like a different way to say this word. Like you're still considering whether it matches the tone, or fits the rhythm, or fits the sound, like we were talking about, of like the actually singing the word. So there's still like, even if you're using this tool to spark ideas, it is just a spark.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on this debate, Q?
Well, it's funny. I again, like I don't contribute to the lyrical output of the band, but I do write a lot, and I've had my own internal battles with the question around the thesaurus. But there's something that happens to me frequently, which is that like I know that there's a word out there that I've encountered or read or spoken at some point, and I know, and I've written it some other way, and I'm like, this isn't quite the term that I was looking for, and it's driving me insane. And that is the most frequent use for me, especially now. I'm back in school right now. I'm back in college. I'm like writing essays, and like, you're writing page after page, and you're also like writing around a fucking theme. So like your language is looping around itself all the time, but you're like, your brain's kind of like slowly starting to like expand into the idea, and you're like, like there's some extra detail that's being left out because I haven't found the right term, or I haven't created the right term, which is often the case with like academic writing. If you're like theorizing about something, like trying to like come up with a way to encapsulate something. So I feel like a lot of the time, like sort of in the way that Damian was pointing towards, is like there's kind of like a thread that I'm chasing, and I just can't. My brain is just not high powered enough to like find the terms that I know that I need. And so I'll like look up the terms that are adjacent and then be like, yes, it was like vestibular I was thinking about. I don't know, like something crazy, but it's mostly usually as like an assistant to something that's like already happening, in my brain. I can't think of very many times in which I was like, I think I should have a better word, or I should think that this should be more complicated, or like, I really want an esoteric term. It's usually like chasing some kind of thing that's burning in my brain.
So from what you're saying, it sounds like there's more to it than just like looking for like a big word equivalent to like an everyday form, right?
Yeah.
No, of course.
So like, yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah,
like,
keep going, sorry.
Like the criteria? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, strangely enough, in my writing, this happens to me a lot where I'm writing a line and I hear the word that I want, and I sometimes don't remember what the word means, but I'm like, this word would sound really nice here because of what kind of preceded it, either the line before or lines above or whatever. And I've had this funny experience sometimes where it's like, yes, that's it. And then I kind of double check what the word actually means. And like, oh shit, that's not the word I want. It sometimes works against me. It's really funny, but I think so much of it is based on sound for me.
It's poetics at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is. And I think there's a big difference between like, I'm going to write a sentence and then translate it using my thesaurus and just replace all the words that I had in there to keep the same meaning. And like, that wouldn't work, obviously. So I think to suggest that one shouldn't use a thesaurus is ludicrous, honestly, because number one, like, I don't know what the alternative is. It's like, you can only use the language that you've been given access to, basically, through your life experience so far. It's like, why? Just use the fucking thing,
Has anyone written on this? Like, everyone's had this experience, right? Of like, you're writing something or you're talking and you use a word because it like feels so proper. It feels
right. Yeah.
Literally based on, I don't know if it's sonically or if it's sort of like for some reason you've projected an aesthetic value like on a word, and then you find out that the meaning is like completely inaccurate. Like, how does that happen? Yeah. What is the fucking link? What's the neurological explanation for that? And when I write poetry a lot, that happens all the time, where there's like a word in which I feel so sure that this is what I want to use, and it like could not be further afield of like what I actually wanted to like say, like what's going on in the brain when that happens? I have no clue.
Gotta study, man. Study more, Gotta memorize the dictionary.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Well, we actually one of the songs that we thought was a bit interesting on the new album in terms of like the way that the language was used is the final track, the Death Knell Ringeth, which despite the use of old English forms, because you have ringeth in the title, and you do have some big words in there like gossamer disguise. The song's ending of I'm ringing the death knell, go to hell, kneel for no lord, time's too fucking short, strutting all night, Satan nips at our heel, decked out in leather and steel, seems to be almost like out of place for the album in a way, especially with fucking even shortened to fucking with like the apostrophe. Why did you I don't know who wrote this one, but why did you decide to take this kind of straightforward, almost casual approach to language on the very, very ending of the album?
That's a good question. I definitely did it. I did do it intentionally.
It was intentional, yeah.
I mean, I think partially it's like an homage to more classic metal in terms of like feel, I think, at least to me. I mean, part of that's just like the topics that I was, bringing up at the time. But I don't know, something about ending with this, like simplifying everything and just being like we're out of here, fuck you. I don't know. It just seems like a good idea at the time. You're right. I mean, the beginning of the song has more like prettier language, I guess, right? And some, words and phrases that are probably a little bit more thought out than what you're bringing up. I don't know. I'm not sure in terms of why I really did it. I can't tell you.
We all have our own reads
Yeah.
on this.
It was,
Damian, what were you going to
it
say?
was controlled by it.
Oh,
Other being.
I was just I was just gonna say,
Got it.
I feel like the style of the lyrics in that song, especially at the end, match the message of the song, which is kind of like Jamie was saying. It's just like, we're gonna do our own thing now. And I think the more direct nature of the words, even with abbreviation there, I think that matches that tone.
I think so too. I think just to sort of like, as my own sort of like poetic read on this thing, like the record has there's a lot of like rising above happening on the record and like traveling through, transformations of certain kinds to come to another point. And I think like we've all been talking collectively about how this record in particular is kind of like a casting off of all doubt, and is kind of like, or at the very least, like stepping forward with a little bit of confidence in terms of like what the band can do musically, lyrically, and such. And like and have that song at the end, which is kind of like it is slightly out of place, but it's also sort of like the result of having like traveled through all of these different transformations, having like risen through like, like once you literally pierce the shield of the universe, which is a line from Cult of Shadow, like you get to these certain heights, like, well, once you've gotten up there and you've really believed in yourself to get up there, well, it's sort of just like, like the metal world is a very judgmental place, and we're not necessarily a band that fits very easily into little cubby holes of like comfy genres. And that's caused us a lot of struggle. That's caused us a lot of doubt. It's made us like feel certain ways about whether like we're doing the right thing or not. And like also feeling like maybe sometimes like a little pissed because we feel like we're doing something really original, and other people who are not doing very original things are like more successful than us, like just being completely vulnerable, about this and being like, this is a feeling. And then once you get to a place in which we're like, well, that's just insecurity talking. Like that's just discomfort talking. And then getting to this place of rising above that and becoming like a new version, right? It was like all of a sudden then we kind of be like, we're not going to waste any time on that kind of bullshit. Like, it's kind of like, not like fuck you and like all of you suck, but almost like a fuck you to our past doubts, like a fuck you to anyone who might think that what we're doing is silly because we're not doing this, we're taking the simple path, because we're not like fitting into some of these like more comfortable things. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a side of us that exists. And I think it's like maybe the first time in a while that it's gotten to exist through a song. And I think to close the record that way is just kind of like a beacon for like, just being like, don't forget that we're also like, we're not afraid to be brash, but we're, it's like, it's serious and no nonsense at the same time.
Well, like talking more about patterns that we saw in your lyrics and other surprising things. So we noticed that we're pretty sure you don't have a single song written in the past tense. So there are lines that are past tense, but the framing of all your songs on all your albums is in the present. So instead, you tend to like adopt this is happening now perspective, as in lines from the new album, like I will coax you out, like vermin hiding in every crawl space in your heart, and you'll flow out blinding. Let it begin, scalpel pirouettes in deft abominations, or behold the Garden of Eden bathed in ultraviolet and fulmination. At most, there are references to something that will occur, as in, and when you've reached the end, you'll bear witness to the new Leviathan, or if you need me, God forbid, I'll be out back shooting at stars. So why do you think you avoid framing things in the past, and why do you tend to like adopt this kind of here and now perspective?
I'm like flabbergasted.
That never occurred to me.
Hearing all these things are very fun. I do think that part of this part of the record is like talking about transformation. I think it's an invitation for the listener to do it. And I think I have always felt in my own writing anyway, in writing songs, like I always like having my lyrics kind of mirror the music, and like it's not just content that is put to the song. It also kind of dictates, like if the riff is fast paced and there's a lot of notes, like I'll often put a lot of words that mimic that, or like if this is a point of emotional kind of like crescendo, there will be longer stretches of lyrics that like mimic it. And I think I always try to make the experience of the words match the story, and match exactly what's going on in some cases. I just feel like it can become this incredibly powerful and like kinetic experience in lyric writing. So for me, like doing it in present tense just also kind of matches that. It's like, this is happening now, always. It's the eternal present. When you have the song on, it's happening again. And again, tying it back to this new record, it's like so much of these songs are messages about acting, about taking control of your life or your situation or whatever it is, and like stepping into yourself and stepping into your being. And I think it's vital in a way to have it in the present tense, because it's, if you listen to it once and it didn't hit you then and like you weren't ready for it or whatever, it's like anytime you turn it on, we're kind of there saying the same thing. Like, here's your reminder. Like, now is still fine, even if you didn't do it yet.
Now's the time. Now,
the time is always now. The time, it's here, you know?
I think also just like the present tense, and this is probably just like a stylistic thing. Obviously, we never like set out like, oh, we're a band that only uses the present tense, but
that was the only rule.
Yeah. I think it's just more immersive from a storytelling perspective. I don't know, the way I view it is like past tense is like someone just recounting a tale, whereas the present is like you're experiencing it right now. Like you are the story, as opposed to just, recounting it to someone else. And I think even this just occurred to me, but like going back to the sort of larger than life thing. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'll see if I can remember that for later.
Okay.
There was a connection.
Probably would have been great.
Would have been what might have been lost.
It might come back to you. You never know.
Yeah.
Well, these next questions aren't as large trends as like, past tense being missing or big words appearing a lot, but we did notice some thematic trends that again were a little surprising to see, given that so many different people are involved in vocals and lyrics. And one was that the topic of like gods, angels, devils, and demons appears quite frequently throughout all your albums so far. So for instance, since 2012's The Chills, all of your albums mention gods at least once, and most mention at least one of the other words. 2018's The Idol, for instance, discusses God 3 times, has the phrase my angel, my muse, as well as my specters, my devils, my dues, mentions demons and uses the phrase demonize. And on your new album, you have 7 mentions of gods or demigods, the phrase leeching demons, and just a direct reference to Satan. Why did these religious figures appear so regularly in your lyrics? What did they add to the stories that you tell?
I grew up Catholic.
Yeah, Matt and I did grow up Catholic, and we were Catholic school all the way through high school. So I'm sure. I mean, it's just because some of those ideas have just become part of I don't want to say our worldview, but these are just themes that have been a big part of our past, I guess. And I guess they creep in, even when we're trying to paint new worlds. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's part of the overall mythology, I guess. And I think when we're mentioning those things in our lyrics, it's certainly not referencing like, well, that's a lie. There are some songs that are very directly related to Catholicism or Christianity. Song like Weeping Relic or something off of Ectasis is like very much a statement about like the Catholic Church. But I think more often than not, these deities, our mom can never hear this. Speaking of these, I think more often than not, when these things are mentioned in our lyrics, it's more of to have a Godhead figure than it is to like directly reference a particular like religious pantheon or religious tradition. And I think because the music and the message are kind of trying to, again, be larger than life and like push the ultimate boundary, I think that these God figures are necessary as like adversaries to go against, I guess, and to topple. And I think in the lyrics for me, it's much more often like, what are the things that we make into gods? What are the things that we give that power to? And like some of them are people, some of them are systems, some of them are ideas that are in our own minds, right? And to me, it's a case of extremes, and like the highest power one can reach, I guess, is personified in like these deity forms. And the songs are more often than not about rebelling against those things and becoming one's own deity figure, I would say.
Yeah, I think they definitely represent that sort of rebellious nature. I did not grow up Catholic, but I feel like just being like an atheist from a young age, you don't like, most people are not that. And so personally for me, growing up at like religion and God has been like a fascinating topic. And I think that incorporating those themes into our lyrics does sort of represent the rebellious nature that at least I sort of felt growing up with that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I also remembered what I was going to say.
Yeah, please.
Because it actually ties in. But I feel like the present tense also has this more omniscient quality to it than the past tense. And I think, as I was saying, that quality ties into the sort of larger than life nature that metal has, and that we're trying to conjure up.
Right. Interesting. Well, this might be a related question then, because another motif that we saw in your lyrics is that of animals. So your first album mentions lambs and goats, as religious references, of course, but also the beast being like a worm, a bed of maggots, and a crucified dove. Your second, third, and fourth albums mention being bred like beasts, a siren's call, a wolf beneath a gown, the conqueror worm consuming all, dog-mouthed ravings, the million-tongued beast, and a hydra head upon the neck of every dead-end street. The new album then talks about a phoenix apostate, vermin hiding, hagfish eyes, and basking like a lizard. So this isn't the most animal references.
Don't forget about the dinosaur.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Totally fine. It's very important. Should have included the dinosaur. Well, in any case, not the most amount of animal references we've seen, but they do seem to, play a significant role as a source of kind of metaphor, especially this vague beast. Is there something about the animal as a metaphor that has attracted you to, use it so frequently?
I feel like this is the flip side of the coin, right? Like you dare to tread in the realm of the divine, but you also need like that foil of like the mundane, like the earthly. I feel like it's easy to like use. I mean, this is speculation again, as it's easier to, because also like some of these records precede my existence in the band. So like I read them also sort of like not as a creative force in making them, but yeah, like it seems like some kind of foil to this other thing. Like they're like the as above, so below kind of thing, like there's something going on there in terms of like bringing in the contrast of like a divine creature versus like the animalistic or the sort of like simple creatures or whatever as they call them.
Yeah. Also perhaps like the exploring the different natures within people as well, I think, and like having these as convenient signposts almost, or like symbols of aspects of the human being and aspects of one's like personality or consciousness or something. I think that's also part of it too. It's like this way of either celebrating or kind of denigrating, I guess, certain traits of humans.
Well, there is like a literary tradition of that, right? Like in the form of like fables, folklore, mythology, like using animals as stand-ins for particular like characteristics or traits of humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never thought about the fact that we tend to use them a lot, or intended to, I guess. I think they just do make for great metaphors in a lot of these instances. And for me, I think it's probably as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just like the influence of what you're saying of growing up in a culture that has so many stories of, I mean, really most cultures I know of do have so many stories of animals, whether it's like folklore, whether they're like children's stories, whatever. And I think it's an inescapable experience of story itself. I think you can't divorce yourself from that. Like we've kind of just grown up this way. And I think in the back of the mind, like they're an immovable animal. The animal world, I guess, the natural world is this like immovable canvas that it's like the building blocks of a way of how we're used to experiencing story. And I think those just work their way in too.
Is there any effort, be it conscious or unconscious, to keep the animals kind of metal feeling? Like there's no butterflies, there's no bunnies, there's no kittens. It's beasts and lizards and phoenixes. Is there a kind of movement towards a certain type of animal, do you think?
I think in terms of the genre, I would say definitely. In terms of us, I don't know. I would say that we've probably, I think that's the larger influence of the genre itself, kind of like stamping its influence upon us. But yeah, I think it's another interesting feature of metal that metal has like claimed certain animals as like symbolic right. Like envoys or something. What's the word I'm looking for here? Messengers or something. And a lot of those, I think, obviously can be traced back to literary traditions that metal is kind of taking from too. But like everyone knows like what animal is more metal than the other, so like which animal is more metal? It's like this one definitely is. Why? I don't know. Is it more aggressive? Is it scarier? Is it like have some ability that is threatening or cool, for lack of a better term? At least there's something really interesting about it. But I do think if one were to study specifically animal usage in metal, I think there'd be like a very clear and discernible pattern and list even.
Is it just we have to avoid animals that could be perceived as cute? I
think so. Though also, I think that there are a lot of metal bands that use like, if a cute animal is involved, its life is in danger. Like, and that is also, I mean, that's like the crucified dove. Like, I think there's this element of like, I do think like innocent animals being used as this a forum, I guess, of like innocence being destroyed or corrupted or something. And I definitely, again, I can't like think of an exact example.
I'm about to look up some lyrics right now.
I think if those animals appear that are like perceived as like gentler or I don't know, cuddly or something, or nice, they're often the sacrifice in the song, or like the thing that is destroyed.
So another trend that we noticed then, this kind of actually goes back to a comment Damian made at the beginning of looking at, being interested in the song titles, because your song titles, you like to use the in the front. You have the mystic, the womb, the somber, desolate winds, the ritual, the eye of madness, the stranger, the vermilion, the nihilist, the solipsist, the idolater, and in the new record, the blaze and the death knell ring it. Are you aware that you use the quite a bit, or is this just by chance? And why do you think you're drawn to this kind of framing of song titles?
I feel like for the Chills, it was kind of a running joke after a certain point. We're just like, oh man. And I genuinely think for the Chills, it was just like, we weren't imaginative enough at the time to like come up with cooler titles. But I think there's some other things lurking in there as to why specifically like the blank or the this or the that. But curious to see what you think, Jed, if you have thoughts or.
I don't know that I really do. I do think there's a bit of an intention there. I don't think we're just throwing the around without realizing.
The Chills, I think the Chills is a different story. But
early on. Well, also I think there are a lot of like classic metal songs that are called the something. Like it is. I think you could view that as almost a theme. And I think we were trying to, do that ourselves in the beginning, and then we got attached to doing so, but maybe for different reasons. But I'm not completely sure what those reasons are, truthfully.
I feel like this also somehow still connects to sort of like this like weird penchant for like history or like mythology, you know, like there's some kind of like mystical, I'm just thinking of like the Odyssey, you know, like the Canterbury Tales, like there's like, you know, like the Lord of the Rings, you know, like this,
Sure.
this is kind of like this like presentation of like, you know, like the tale, the adventure you will now go on. Like there's something about that I think metal has like definitely latched onto. And I think that it's also like, you see it in literature a lot. I feel like sci-fi, fantasy, like there's always sort of like the presentation of this, like this world, and it kind of just does it immediately for you, right? Like even when it's vague, like we have a song called The Stranger that is like, I think like very well known in the catalog, and like that alone, whether you know the references involved or whatever, like it just sort of like puts you like at the door of some tale like immediately, more than being like, you know, other kinds of linguistic constructions. It's hard to think of an example off the top of my head, but like, you know, like this is very odd. I never thought about it before today. So
I think this just occurred to me, but I think it also ties into like when you put the in front, it becomes like the original, or like the archetype, or like the original form. Like, I don't know, I'm imagining some sort of like Plato's cave thing happening here, but yeah, but that's very interesting. What I can say about the song titles is they all are very deliberate, and there's like a voting process. Like I think probably on all of our albums, like every song has various options for titles, and we vote on it. And I do recall some discussion of like, oh, we probably don't want like every song title to be like 2 words or something like that. So there is definitely some thought that goes into it.
I do also want to mention, this is a brilliant thing that you mentioned this, Damian, in terms of thinking about like Platonic forms, right? Like I don't, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong philosopher, but whoever it was that's like, everything that we deal with in the real world is like a simulacrum of like the essential form. Like if we say like a horse or like horse, that's like abstract, like could be any horse. But when you say the horse, it's sort of like, it's this one, right? And like, you know, like if when you're claiming like the thing, like maybe you're like sort of like almost like brashly being like, it's like the one. It's not like the abstraction. It's not like the fake form that you can just like perceive with your, you know, human brain. It's like you have access to like you were saying, Darren, like the original, like the actual thing is right in front of you.
Not the shadow of it.
Yeah, not the shadow. Exactly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because like in English grammar, right, we have like definite and indefinite determiners, the being the definite determiner. So it's the book, meaning a specific book, rather than like a book, which could be any book. So does the use of the definite rather than the indefinite form like add a certain, I don't know, specificity that makes like the song titles appear more significant than they would if it was, let's say, a mystic, a womb, a somber, desolate wind?
Yeah,
I think that's probably spot on. I mean, think of the song like calling a song Blaze versus The Blaze. I think there's like a different weight to them. Yeah, you know.
I mean, metal also wants to claim things. I mean, just like culturally, like it's a problem. All of us, I think, struggle with it, right? Because this is the culture we're like conditioned to. But like metal not only wants to like, you know, like speak of originality, speak of like what's like the true form of something, you know, or like the most legitimate form of things. Like, and I say this in all of its problematics, right? Like, and I think that indefinite versus definite form thing, like that's like, it gives you a sense of like, yeah, we're claiming that thing. Like it's our book. It's like our mythology, you know, and like we're presenting it to you. We're not leaving you in the sort of the generalist place. We're bringing you like right to it for sure.
You mentioned that you kind of moved away from some of the, gore horror stuff, but the fact that you had some of that on your earlier albums does make me think that that's something you're all into a little bit. Is there a potential influence of horror here as well? Because I'm thinking like, The Thing, The House on Haunted Hill, the Blob. There's a lot of the in horror. Is there any kind of does the X feel like darker?
In a horror context, I think so. And we're just used to hearing it, I think. And then to answer your question, yes, I've seen like an obscene amount of horror movies across my life.
I think we all have. Yeah.
Yeah, and so many of them are just the blank, the crawling eye, like the stuff. Yeah,
Wait, there's a movie called The Stuff?
yeah, there is.
Oh my god.
It's like this strange alien like yogurt. That's a wild 80s one for you. That's a deep cut.
I have to check it out.
It's probably like a 0.01 star film.
Yeah, it's like an unbearable watching.
It's an unbearable watch, but there's some wild effects in there for sure.
Okay. So of course, I mentioned earlier that I do like pronouns. We did want to ask you about some interesting patterns in your pronoun use. So your first EP never takes the first person, but your first album does, with 35 uses of I. Agdisis then only has 14 uses of I, and Areta has 28, and with Idol we're back down to 18, and then the new album has just 12. There are also a lot of songs of the new album, including Neon Leviathan, Preteritan, Him, Cult of Shadow, Exogenesis, and Ontological Mysterium. So about half the songs of the album with no I at all. So we have a few questions here. The first one being, why do you think you moved away from the first person since Idol?
I'm surprised by that, actually.
Yeah, I would almost think that the new record would have more than Idol did, but to me, I do think Idol was a little more focused on like negative experiences and feeling held back, feeling held down, feeling like obstructed. So I guess in a way it doesn't surprise me, because I think there's a lot of egocentrism perhaps in that record of like being the one who is experiencing the negative feeling, and maybe there's a tendency to really identify that with oneself, especially when it comes to pain. It's like that's when I really know that it's me and like it's about me. I think the experience of pain or the experience of discomfort or depression or whatever, I think the self becomes even more focused and in view. Whereas generally speaking, and again, this record's much more about transformations. It's about like overcoming. It's about growth. It's about joyousness in a way, or at least like struggling towards these things. And I think perhaps philosophically that also kind of signals this move outward, away from the self, because there's a little paradoxically, even though it's like you're focusing on your own journey, but there's more of an awareness of the world, perhaps. So there's more of an awareness of the space that you're growing into. And it's funny because it makes me think of like these old hippie books about how like the more condensed that one is, like the worse one feels, or like the more expansive one is, like the more free one feels, or the more like evolved one is, or something, right? And I think maybe that was a wild connection that I made off the cuff, but I could see that playing a role in it. Like there's this expansiveness on the new record that there isn't as much of a need to maybe like claim the self almost, because you're past it. It's past the need to like define oneself so strictly. Maybe that would be my guess.
Why did you expect that there would be more on this album? You mentioned initially you were surprised by that.
I think that's exactly why, because it's like this paradox of seemingly the new record to me, I guess thematically would speak to the use of I more, because I feel like there's this element of like taking control and this element of being the force that changes, which is why I would expect that. But maybe by the same token, when one becomes identified with movement and force, like one is no longer I anymore. Because I is always behind you. I is always in the past. And now is movement, and now is change. And where there is no I, because the I is always growing, right? So I think that would, if I did like psychoanalyze my own thoughts on this, I would come to that, I think. Just this like the transformations of the record is, there is no end goal, I don't think. It's not like you are now this. To me, I think this just aligns with like my life pursuit in general. It's more about constant change. And with constant change, there is no I. It is just change. And the minute you point to one thing, it's gone.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing that it's gone, because it's hopefully more expansive than it was a second ago.
I also wonder if like the courage and like lack of doubt too, like it's like one of those funny things, right? When you're like suffering and you are feeling insecure, or you're struggling, or you're like in some kind of pit, right? Like you're like, there is, like you were saying, like there's a focus on the eye. There's like an awareness of the eye. And then like if you're
Like, curse you, cruel world.
yeah,
me, you know?
very sort of like looking oneself in the mirror and how, you know, like having this hat, like there's, yeah, so much I in there. And then like if you're moving beyond that, or maybe even if like maybe collectively, if we're like, there's some kind of encouraging message on Ontological, the new record, you know, like we're not as focused, like there's a lot more there's a lot more like considering the world, you know, and like we're just less, if you're more comfortable with yourself, you're actually less concerned about I. It's like when you're uncomfortable with yourself that you're like really like saying I, you know, like to be like to try to like reassure or like reinvestigate or whatever, you know, and like if you're in a better place, or if you're like you've come into something, like maybe, I don't know, maybe it becomes less of a concern.
Yeah. Well, even breaking this down, just like interpersonal relationships, like when do you feel the best? It's like when you're in communion with someone else, which is when you aren't thinking of you anymore. Like you aren't you anymore. You're some kind of alchemical mix of like of the two people. Like the boundary is lost, right? And thinking this like transcendence transformation piece, like that ultimately is what it's after. It's like the loss of the boundary. And when boundary is gone, like so is I. But you're still aware. Like there's an awareness that you are acting, that you're moving through the world, but there's your own boundaries are much more, they just flow a lot more. And if I think, like, what is a feeling, if we're talking about transformation and change and like, I don't know, ecstasy or something, like what are the times that one feels those most? It's like, even if we want to relate this back to playing music, because I think a lot of like why we are making the music is because we want people to feel the ecstasy of the making of the music and like the kind of prying into the mystical forces I think that music has. And tying this wild rant all the way together, I think most people's reports of like best feeling are when they are completely lost in something, like a passion or like the flow state. So I don't know which psychologist was talking about that a couple of years back, but like what is this flow state when you're operating at this like incredibly high level is when you aren't really aware of being this individual being. You're completely lost in something. And I think there's something to that freedom is like the loss of self in terms of the concern of self, and it kind of frees you to interact with everything for real.
So when you write of I, then, like when you experience, you know, you've kind of described like this kind of ego death that occurs like over the course of like the like various albums and stuff. I mean, like when you're writing of I, then does that represent like yous as individuals? Like, are you talking about your own subjective self-awareness then when you write about I? Is it Matt, Damian, Jamie?
I would definitely say no. And I think, I'm curious what you all will say about this, but
I agree with you there, personally.
I think the I is almost, when they are used in our songs, it's always aimed at putting the listener into the, and we've covered this already kind of, but like putting the listener into the shoes of the person or the thing, like experiencing the movement of the song. And hopefully like a just as one would use like a first person narrative, if you were writing a book or something, it's like, I want you to almost be fooled for a minute, even if it's only a minute or a second, that you are the one thinking this thing and that you are the one experiencing it. And no matter how personal these songs are, I think they're never meant, I have anyway for this band, never wrote a song that was meant to be like, I want the listener to know that this was my experience. It's I want to generalize my experience because I know other people have it too, and or may someday, and like create this space for them to also process and think about it. And I'm kind of thinking over the lyrics for all of our songs in general. I think again, like I think experiences become kind of coded into story and into our own like mythology and our own myths. And just as anyone making a myth in the past was trying to do, it's like the myth is meant to teach us something. And the myth is meant to like communicate an idea that goes beyond the necessity of like one's individual experience. Like this is, I guess we're trying to get to like a universal experience, right? So I think that the I is that. It's like, okay, we are myth making, we are story making, we are taking a real life event and transforming it into a story that has its own symbolism and its own life, and generalizing it enough that the listener can hopefully like step into it as well.
Well, something that Alex mentioned earlier, I think, was that like the new album has more you on it. And I don't know if you meant that in a literal sense, but that does track with what we found in the lyrics, because up until 2018, you had like 54 uses of you and your across all your albums. A sizable number, certainly, but the new album has 33 uses. So about 38% of all the yous to date are just on like this one album out of 6 releases, appearing in lines like, I will coax you out, I speak not to you, there is no you, we'll pluck out your eyes, and the gods who mock each step will bow before you in the end. So yeah, is this what you meant by the use of you? And why do you think you've moved towards like a massively increased use of you on this one album?
I feel like all the answers kind of track in the same way, like from the previous question. It was a guess, by the way. Like I didn't know.
Well,
I did not know that at all. I was just like, based on all of the conversations that we've had about like what, like, and it's very interesting because like, again, like someone mentioned earlier about how like the picture of the album is becoming clearer to us now that we get to talk about it so much, because it isn't like this preconceived concept. But based on those conversations, I'm not surprised by that there's like, yeah. And I think it's all, Matt has already very, very well explained what some of the reasoning behind that might be.
I think the simple, like a lot of those cases are just like direct address to like it's like almost taking a step from I'm going to craft a world for you to like think about and experience. And this record, I think the boldness of the album is like mirrored in that language too. It's not enough that we just hope that you experience it. It's like, hey, you, like, fuck, experience this right now. You, I'm talking to you, you know? And I think in a way, this album presents a bit more of like a challenge to, it's almost like we're daring people to do it instead of just putting out there and be like, all right, like, it'd be cool if you thought about this stuff, but like, it's all right, whatever. And I think talking about this boldness and confidence, it's this idea of being confident enough in what we're saying that we're kind of being a little more aggressive about wanting people to experience these things and like not being afraid of standing in them to that degree where it's like, hey, I am almost calling you out. And I think a lot of songs are, whether we're calling ourselves out or calling others out, I think there is some calling out that is happening for sure.
So it is like a direct address then towards the listener specifically.
Yeah, I think in most cases, yeah.
Interesting.
I don't want to call this like a contradiction, but you mentioned that like the I, you want the listener to put themselves in the role of the I, but they're also the you, right? Like how am I supposed to do both? Like how am I supposed to put myself into the I and experience that, but then also be the you in the song, right? I guess, is there a clash there or no?
Yes, but clashes are not. This is like, I don't know. I feel like I'm as a poet, I am like particularly like against the idea that like the whole point is that like these contradictions can like exist as a state to be settled, but like as an actual like material to be dealt with. Like we have like an absolute fucking obsession with this idea that like contradictions are these things that we need to like slaughter, that we need to like piece apart into their like constituent parts so that they can like sit in their little settled places that we can manipulate and control perfectly. And it's like, this is like maybe one of the only reasons that we make these like useless fucking things, that we do things like make music and make poems and like while the world is fucking on fire and like people are hungry, like because we like there's an inherent need to have like some kind of space that doesn't work in binary, but like doesn't work in these ways. And I think that like you can travel along the spectrum of this like problematized pronomial experience, right? Is that like you're right to point out that like it is problematic. And I think like
I didn't go
like,
so far to call
it
problematic.
Problematized, pronomial. This has some great words.
Dare I say, it is ontologically mysterious.
Okay.
Wow, look at that.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Very good.
Yeah.
On theme, yeah.
Also, I wonder how often they coexist in the same song.
I and you.
Yeah.
Well, like, I mean, what are the lines? I will coax you out. I speak not to you. There is no you.
Yeah, so that song, yes, but that was yeah. Like Chris and Puya, they're supposed to coexist, almost to like blur the two.
Well, yeah, I think
in that example for one.
For what you were just saying, like the first thought that came to my mind when you mentioned that is there's this great, very wacky prog band called Gong, and it reminds me of on the back of one of the records. It's like I am, you are Gong or something like that. And again, like to this boundary erasing thing, where I think the I and the you are purposefully muddled a bit to signify that the dissolution of boundary. And I'm thinking of like the line in Cult of Shadow, where it's like, so the song is like, there is a lot of I in that song, like, beat me back, I'll keep on climbing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I'm doing this. And then there's a line, and the gods will bow before you. And to me, that is like the turnaround where the listener becomes the I. And it's like, because you're going to do these things too. And the cycle will continue again. And it's like, that would be my take on it. It's like this perhaps even subconscious like technique of dissolving the boundary and getting the listener involved, while like also, of course, I think when we are writing lyrics, like I think we are sometimes the characters in those songs too, you know. And I think it is this dual experience of being the character and also hoping that like other people decide to become the character as well. Because the character wasn't just made as a vessel for me, it was made as a vessel for anyone who wants to take it. And it reminds me of the Man-O-War's like faceless warrior character, like their mascot guy. And the whole point is that like it's faceless because you can impose your own identity on it. And I think that's some of what's going on here.
Well, another pattern that we looked at that I think Damian actually mentioned at the beginning of our interview was your use of rhyme and alliteration. Because although you use neither constantly, both do appear on every album. So for instance, we can see rhymes like scheming neath the moon, casting wicked spells, punish hearts so dark, drag them into hell, which mirror rhymes appearing off your latest release. For instance, Man Machine Paralyzed by eyes that gleam in vicious luminosity. Likewise, we observed a lot of kind of two-word alliteration in particular, like Merlin the Mystic, Womb of Winter, Serpentine Sensation, Magma Miasmic, and Succumb to Steel. And in some instances, there's even a combination of both rhyme and alliteration, such as in the lines Mausoleum Mind, Fear Divine, Fatal Dance with Space and Time, and Never Deign to Bow, Deities and Decrees I Disavow. So what appeals to you about rhyme and alliteration, independently and in combination?
It's good.
I mean, listen to how beautiful all those phrases.
It's linguistically great.
Okay, next question.
I mean, are we supposed to be the gory, not sound good genre? Like, why do we want things that sound good in our in a genre that embraces dissonance?
I was completely joking, but it's rhythmic. I mean, it's rhythmic, and also like I mean, just like think about metal music. Like the literal like the majority of the content is like like rhythmically jumpy, like kind of like it has like a lilt to it, like I don't know, like, and something about alliteration and sort of like the sort of like fury of like and for us, like we're syncopated a lot, but it's also like very like driving rhythms all the time. So it's like I don't know, like alliteration just like has some kind of quality to it that I think like maybe matches that pretty well. And also, again, like back to like Damian and Matt's points about just like the mouthfeel of words and like something being enjoyable about it. And also, I don't know how y'all feel about this, but when you're playing in a death metal band, we're also like screaming and stuff. Like, I feel like we exist in this space where like both Damian and Matt are like yelling vocalists, but you can hear what they're saying, I think, if you listen closely. And like, yeah, like, and having alliteration and like small phrases that are kind of like memorable, like maybe help bring that forward, especially in a band like this, where like the lyrics are not just bullshit. Like, it's not just like a zombie ate my brain, you know, it's like, like there are things that we do ultimately like really like, I think we'd all be pretty sad if people like didn't take note of the lyrics in the band. Like there's a lot of heart and mind and soul between these three and the lyrics for the band. So it's like all tools to kind of that like musically match, maybe aesthetically match at times, and also like help bring focus to something that maybe, as we were talking about at the top of this interview, often get lost. Like lots of people are like, it's metal. I'm not gonna fucking look at these lyrics at all, which is like maybe a shame. And this is something that can maybe like help cure that problem a little bit.
Do y'all vibe with that?
I think so, yeah. I think mechanically speaking too, I find that using things like rhyme, alliteration, consonants, all that stuff, it does also help build almost this like internal velocity of the words. And this is kind of what I was trying to get at. I don't know how well earlier when I was talking about trying to make like the lyrics mimic the movement of the song. And I think using these techniques and like these linguistic techniques and literary devices and whatnot, I think they also can work backwards on the music, where it's like the speed of the word and not how they're delivered, but kind of how the words flow, how the words press on one another and have their own energy and speed. I think that also makes the music sound faster sometimes too. It's like it's carrying forward, or at least giving the illusion that it's like carrying forward the music with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if one were to study this in my own songwriting anyway, of how those two interweave, like how moments of high emotion or moments of high kind of like movement and change is mirrored in the uses of those things.
Interesting. I guess kind of moving to something else that we saw throughout is that there's a lot of implications of gore throughout your lyrics. Kind of, again, like I use implications there purposefully because to give some examples off the new album, you talk about there's a mention of being burned alive, learning how to tear chitin back, plucking out eyes, and some kind of body modification conducted with a scalpel. And then your early albums have songs like Rip to Shreds, which mention a rotting hand emerges from the grave, bathed in dirt and sweet decay, to tear the limbs from the torso of all who pulse with the putrid form called life. But we don't have any real explicit discussions of gore violence that we would see on, say, like a Cannibal Corpse album or like an early Carcass album. Do you consciously draw a line in how vivid your descriptions of gore and violence are? And if so, how do you decide where that line is?
I think gore, at least on the newer stuff, you talk about like burning, you talk about the scalpel moment, there are often like bodily disfigurement or change as an embodiment of like either the other or an embodiment of transformation itself. I think at this point in our career, like we don't really use gore as a thing for shock value or something, or like ever want it to take center stage. But things like, I don't know, like the body horror movies, like from what's his name, Cronenberg or something, come to mind, where it's almost like this destruction of the body is like a signal of transformation or a sign of transformation. And I was reading something recently that was really interesting, actually, about like a lot of traditions of like deity figures or mythical figures or gods or whatever that are disfigured in some way, or like deformed in some way, or just different or whatever, or and how these are like portals into the other and portals into the, what's the word I'm looking for here? The uncanny. And I think for us, the lyrics tend to be more like violence and gore and whatnot is used more in that sense, where it's like, it kind of opens this window into transformation or change or other ways of being. Whereas like, of course, our early records, like it was about a horror story and like, it's supposed to be fun and you're supposed to enjoy this. Whereas I think now it is very much geared towards this like transformative idea. And while I don't know if we like necessarily set limits for ourselves on this, I think we really do want to distance ourselves from being overly explicit, I guess, and having that cloud the message, or having that cloud like what it is that we're trying to do.
Well, does it operate the same way with swearing? Because that's something else that we noticed is that, you know, and I think this is a pattern we haven't seen before. You allow just one fuck per album and nothing more. So your 2009 EP has Get the Fuck Up, You Crazy Corpse. 2012's The Chills mentions being fucked by pestilence. 2014's Exodus asserts fuck all the angels, and Anarata and Idol are actually entirely clean. And then the new album has times too fucking short on the third from last line. So is it the same thing? Like, are you just trying to avoid like an excess of swearing?
It's almost like a PG-13 movie. Like
Yeah.
You get one.
you get one. Like, are you aware that you have one? Like max?
I can't let this thought out. Sorry. Have you like seen there's like that bit? There's like those interviews with Pippin and the other guy from Lord of the Rings talking about how like the rating for Lord of the Rings would allow exactly one swear word, and they were just like they're like speculating about like what lines it could have been spent on. And I guess that's how the band operates. None of us, I don't think anyone's thought about this for a second, but I think most likely just because of like the serious nature of like, or like the philosophical nature of a lot of the lyrics, since Ectus is on, like swear words don't necessarily like carry that, like it kind of like muddles that vibe a little bit, so it just like doesn't come to mind. But then there are times where it's just sort of like you need that brashness of like, I feel like with The Stranger, like fuck all the angels is like it's often one of the only times where I notice out in the crowd that like everyone knows those words, you know, and it's just like like it's a popular song, and like this line just like needed that force behind it, you know, for whatever reason, you know. But I don't think I would be shocked if there was much thought about avoiding swear words or using them for like pinpointed purposes.
I think they just don't fit that well with what we're trying to do often. Like you mentioned how it comes up, you know, the third to the last line of the new album. But as you already brought up, that section is almost like stepping out of what the rest of the album was to like ride into the sunset in a like thematically different way. And, you know, with like beer in hand kind of thing. I don't know. So it's like, I feel like it doesn't fit often in what we're doing. That's probably why it doesn't show up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how come
I think ultimately,
fuck makes the cut, but like shit doesn't?
that's a good question.
I don't know.
I feel like that's just purely like emphasis than it is anything else.
Yeah, well, it's also
it just feels much more of like an emphatic word to like drive something home, you know.
fuck and fucking are like, you know, you're not gonna like be like fuck being like a verb. You're not gonna be like we're just not gonna talk about like shitting as a verb in this band. And like fucking is like the most versatile curse word. You know, like when you think of all the other curse words, like they're all like too cornered, and like fucking just like for some reason are like, it's like a gift from God, very flexible word.
Is you mentioned like the beginning of this interview, you all talked about trying to make the language not seem day to day. Like, is that part of it at all as well? Like, I mean, imagine you've sworn in this interview. Is swearing too like normal?
I think in a way, maybe so. I don't know. You could think of other types of music that have swearing like that all the time. I think the way that we set this up is certainly trying for something different. So I think you're probably right. And in a way, it is too normal.
My friend's dad used to say to us, like, he was like cool dad, but he always had this like whole thing where he would like come down on, if we were hanging out at his house, he would like come down on us for cursing, but only if it was too much. And he would always be like, listen, I'm not against you cursing. You have to understand, like, these words are here to help you. And if you overuse them because you're being a child, they're going to lose their power. You need to be careful. So like, if you're going to say fuck, you better say fuck when you need it. You know, like, don't be running around my house, like playing your stupid little video games and like saying like fucking shit all the time. You know, he was very adamant that these words have power and you need to like make sure you're careful.
Yeah, I do think they're at very specific points of emphasis in our songs, and only under like certain tones, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of the whole thing.
Well, on that point about words having kind of power, right? We're just gonna wrap up with our final question. I guess we'll kind of just go down the line either direction. But if we were to take everything we've talked about and discuss it broadly, what would you say is the role of lyrics in Horrendous's music and art? And then more broadly, what do you think is the role of lyrics and language in extreme metal as a genre?
For me, I think the lyrics are always emphasizing the emotional impact of the music and directing, I should say, not just emphasizing, but very much directing the emotional impact of the music, and amplifying and putting a story to this perhaps what can sometimes be a bit of like an ambiguous and overwhelming emotional field that a song is creating. And putting a face to the thing, I think, putting a face to the being that is in the song. That would be me. What else do you think?
About you, D?
I don't have much to add to that. I liked Matt's use of the word amplify there, because they are meant to sort of amplify whatever the song is doing, like whether it's, you know, some like huge glorious moment of melody or something like that. But yeah, I mean the lyrics in Horrendous I think they're very important, which is sort of ironic considering one of the first things I said in this interview was that I didn't care about lyrics, like as I was growing up listening to metal.
For sure, yeah.
But yeah, it adds to, I think it solidifies like the serious nature of our music, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I don't know. That's all I have to add.
Yeah, I mean, I agree along most of these lines. I think we started out with more generic horror, gore, whatever lyrics, and then there's a certain point where, at least for me, I just kind of growing up in a lot of like punk music and stuff that was like trying to tell you something or say something that they felt was important. I wanted songs that like tried to say something, even if it was under perhaps more veiled circumstances within like, you know, metal imagery and stuff. You know, the early stuff is just, here's a song about a zombie, whereas some of our later songs are more like trying to describe perhaps our philosophical thoughts on a topic or something. You know what I mean? I think we do take the lyrics very seriously, especially later in the career, maybe not as much at the very beginning. And I think for me, I like songs that are like about something. They're not just about zombies for the sake of being about zombies.
I feel bad. We've really villainized zombies tonight.
And there's place for that too.
Zombies ain't safe.
But this is also like, maybe all of this is also symptomatic of something else, which is also like, I mean, when I was growing up, being a metalhead meant you weren't serious. You know, like everyone was looking at you like you're just like a little fucking rascal who doesn't, you know, just like wants to cause trouble and like doesn't like, you know, like who isn't intelligent or, you know, it's just sort of like for the sake of being a little punk, you know. And it's like, I do think for a lot of us who have like essentially been playing music or metal music like our entire fucking lives, it's just sort of like, you know, it's like epitome of sort of like, you know, it's not a phase, you know, but that aside, also be thinking that like, I just think like across the board, metal lyrics are like meant to like electrify you in some way. I think like in every subgenre, even some that have seeming like there are subgenres in metal that would like never want to be in the same room together probably. But like, I do feel like still you could say that there's like something that's supposed to sort of like get into your blood, get under your skin and sort of like affect you in some way. And I think that holds true. So like, then that's sort of to answer the auxiliary question of sort of like, what's the role of metal lyrics, like sort of like abroad. And yeah, I think that all of us have had some pretty like magical experiences when it comes to music. Like I've lived my fucking childhood dreams, like literally playing in this band. So like, and a lot of those dreams were fantasies when I was younger, you know, that I was living vicariously through older people playing in bands and also through lyrics and through like the worlds that were being conjured by the music I was listening to as a kid. So like, you know, now I feel so comfortable not being a writer, but like playing behind those lyrics. Like I love participating in a band like Horrendous, even though I'm not putting the lyrical content out there, because like, I hope that there's like a 14-year-old out there who's having that experience, who's like being electrified, like feeling like they actually can pierce the shield of the universe. Like just, they put this song on and step out the door, they might actually be able to do it, you know? Like that happened for me. Like I survived off of that through some pretty tough circumstances as a young person. So like, I just think whether the lyrics are silly, because I even think silly lyrics can do this, you know, like thrash lyrics that are about like partying, like maybe there's some like ecstasy that is actually very serious, like embedded in that. Like that's what I think the sort of like the hope or the purpose of the lyrics is sort of like.
Yeah. And to emphasize, we do love lots of that stuff too.
True.
We're speaking in terms of like what we want our band to be now in this time and place, but we love plenty of that stuff as much as the next person and get electrified by it.
But I think that's also precisely why our lyrics aren't like completely outside of the metal lexicon, though. I think the whole point is kind of, for me anyway, it's like I want to play in the same sandbox in terms of the terminology and like the forms, but I want to push the walls of it out a little bit further and like demonstrate how you can make something new even with old materials, you know. And I think it's interesting because that kind of ties in with our musical philosophy too. It's like we are bringing all these different sounds and styles into our work, but it's never just a copy and paste. Like we're putting a jazz part in here, you know, like that's not there. And I think bands that do that, in my opinion, aren't very successful because it just sounds like a mashup of like metal and some other thing that has developed its own very specific lexicon. And you're just like, here, they're living together. It's like, no, they're not. It's like oil and water. Like you're looking in the cup and they're probably not mixed together at all. Like it's not the same thing, you know? And I think lyrically, I've been kind of thinking about this. Like I think that's why, at least I'd imagine everyone else, like hasn't just been like, we're gonna do something completely different with the lyrics than what's ever found in metal. Is I think there's a desire to bring that language forward and to bring those ideas forward and not to abandon like the building blocks of the thing, but to demonstrate how they can be used differently and like expand.
Well, yeah, I think that's a fantastic kind of line to wrap it up on. Thank you. That was
great note to end on.
That's incredible. That's yeah. We haven't actually had that kind of discussion of like using language to show your place in metal in a way, like playing in the sandbox. To show. So yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about it like that before. So yeah, you guys are heading on tour pretty soon, right? And when is everything? I believe this will be released right when your tour is about to finish. But when can people expect to hear all the new stuff, and how can they check out what you're all up to?
Tell them, D.
So yeah, we're going on tour. We're playing a bunch of shows in Texas, Arizona, and California. That'll be in July, and the new record Ontological Mysterium comes out August 18th. And yeah, we're on Bandcamp. I think it's just horrendous.bandcamp.com, and that's probably the easiest way to check us out.
Yeah. So that, you know, whatever platform you
Spotify,
get, everything.
Yeah, pretty much any streaming service you can find it. But
and then our Instagram, I think it's Horrendous Official. Is there an underscore in there?
Underscore official, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We'll be updating about our travels and stuff coming out with the record and everything, like mostly through the Instagram. So it's a good place to keep up with us.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, as always, the links will be in the description for this episode.
Sweet.
Well, exciting. Can't wait to hear the full record. Thank you guys again so much for taking the time to let us into, you know, everything you've been doing and everything that's gone into this new record.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting interview. So we really appreciate like the effort, particularly from, you know, all four of you.
Yeah. There's a lot less talking over each other and interrupting than I was kind of worried that was going to happen, but it was we were very for a bunch of metalheads, we were very orderly and
we're a respectful bunch.
Yeah.
It's an insightful interview for us as well. A lot of patterns we didn't know. So
I was already thinking about how this is going to like influence like the next album's writing. all the patterns we've learned about.
The pronoun stuff alone is like very, very concerning.
People have mentioned that sometimes, and it's starting to make me worry that this podcast is like contaminating the data pool. Like, you know, you change the outcome by measuring it kind of thing. I'm starting to worry.
Yes.
Like, we've had a few people tell us at the end of the interview, like, this has made me think about like these things I'm doing, and I might like do less now or whatever. It's like, oh no, we're
actually getting into the observer's paradox.
We're spilling, like we're contaminating the purity of what we're trying to say.
100%.
Yeah.
this is the Schrodinger's cat.
Exactly. We observed the cat. Oh no, we opened the box, and now
and now it's a horse.
The cat was a mystery, but now it's like the cat is conscious of it's being observed.
I think it will make things better personally. It's like adding this metacognitive layer of writing now, where it's like, well, why am I picking this thing? Why did this come to my mind? what are the patterns that are emerging through a record? I do think most lyricists in metal like aren't thinking of these things.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, like, I thank you for the obscene amount of work it must have been to find these things and to kind of sit and sift through all of that.
Do you feed the lyrics through a software?
No.
We
Just pure
read
scouring through.
Like at most I'll do like Control F in Word.
for word searches and stuff, for like pronoun counts and stuff like that.
Yeah. But like we just read all the lyrics from, like, I usually go chronologically, read them all, look for a theme, like take notes, like this theme comes up, and then there's some things like we ask everyone about swearing, we ask everyone about pronoun use, so those are pretty, Control F that.
Yeah.
But pretty manual, yeah.
Cool. Wow, that's awesome.
Pretty low tech operation.
That's amazing. I love that.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. That was amazing. We really enjoyed that.
Yeah. I'm glad
Likewise.
to catch up with you again once you start writing your new release, so we can see if you've made any changes.
Yeah.
That would be great.
We'll do this again.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'll follow up.
Sweet.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. This was great.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Sure. You too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Brutalica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present.